Can you hear my heartbeat? Can you hear me all okay? All the way in the back? That's impressive against all the background noise, because I can't even hear me. Okay, so this lecture is available in some various forms online, on YouTube probably. I've given it a few times in the past year. Each time I've given it, I've added a couple of things, subtle changes, a little bit of information I've wanted to add. So anyway, I don't imagine I'm going to be giving the lecture much longer. I need to come up with some new material. But this subject of a saltwater pond has inspired people quite a bit. There's a lot of interest in it. Most people are not doing saltwater ponds in their home. It's something that's relatively easy to do here in the state of Florida. You could do it practically anywhere, but of course, if you did further north, you'd need to have some kind of a greenhouse over it to maintain the temperature adequately. So, yes, I'm Julian Sprung from Two Little Fishies, and let me tell you about what inspired me to consider building a saltwater pond. Well, I saw something similar done at the Waikiki Aquarium by Dr. Bruce Carlson. It's called the Edge of the Reef. If you ever have a chance to visit it. Of course, he's no longer there at the aquarium, but they do still have Edge of the Reef. It looks like this. It's outside, natural sunlight. They did beautiful rock work all the way around, so it looks like a natural pond, and there are acrylic windows as well. In any case, this wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but seeing it gave me the idea that a large body of water where your main view was top down could be a really interesting ornamental display. Here you can see what it looks like from the side. And by the way, the aquarium in Waikiki is using the natural seawater right there. It's located on the ocean. Similarly, Coral World in Eilat, Israel, has outdoor coral exhibits that you could technically call ponds, and they're using the natural Red Sea water, which you can see here. This is a picture I took offline, or it's from online. You can find this if you look up Coral World Eilat. And similar to what Dr. Carlson did at Waikiki Aquarium, lots of the native local corals. A lot of fishes as well. You can even see there's giant clams there in the center. That's the native Squamacina clam from the Red Sea. There's also a Red Sea Maxima clam visible there. Now, I went to Coral World in Eilat and I saw an outdoor display like this, but at the time I was there, which was 1997, this one was not set up. They had a much smaller one. This is my photograph of it. And although it's less colorful than this one, I was blown away by this setup. I looked at it, and here we are in the bright, bright sunlight. And look at that white sand bed with the black sea cucumber on it and the diadema sea urchins. I really, really was inspired by the simplicity of this. It's something that you can see in nature near shore at low tide. And I thought, boy, someday I'd love to set up something like that and not load it up with 1 million corals and 1 million fish. Another inspiration for me was something I saw at Walter Ade's Marine Systems Laboratory in Washington, D.C., as well as at Biosphere 2, which he was involved with. And I had the privilege of consulting on Biosphere 2 in Tucson, Arizona. They had set up systems with mangroves, Everglades ecosystem and mangrove ecosystem. This is a picture you can find online with Dr. Walter Ade talking to Robert Redford in one of the greenhouses in Washington, or just outside of Washington, D.C. And his work was really inspiring because Dr. Ade really would duplicate a whole ecosystem. He wasn't just trying to keep one thing or another thing. He brought in the whole biotope And the same thing with mangroves. He had the substrate, he had seagrass, he had just a beautiful demonstration of something we can see ourselves here in the state of Florida. But when you're in Arizona or in Washington, D.C., it's not your typical scene. More recently, I had the opportunity a few years back to see the Burger Zoo in the Netherlands. I'm actually going to be going back there next week, and it's something that you must see if you ever go to Holland. They have a real mangrove ecosystem right there under this greenhouse. That's the door entrance, and this is what you see. So this is not a 50-gallon tank with a mangrove propagule sticking out of it. This is a whole ecosystem with tides and mud skippers and fiddler crabs and manatees. It's the whole kit and caboodle. There's ducks, there's butterflies in there. Sarah, they've got butterflies flying. Have you been to Burger Zoo? No, you need to see this. You walk through that door and you are you're transitioning from the Netherlands to tropical Florida easily. All the smells are there. It's amazing. There was also some local inspiration in South Florida. A local hobbyist in Fort Lauderdale named Joe Biesterfeld set up an outdoor saltwater pond, mainly for fish, but he also put corals in it. And I saw that back in, I'm trying to remember when that was. I think it was very early 2000s. And I have a picture of it. Before that, in the 1990s, I had the opportunity to visit Dick Boyd, who set up a 3,000-gallon reef aquarium in his garage. And it was lit by natural sunlight, and he had refugiums connected to it, filled with caulerpa and giant clams. Unfortunately, I don't have a picture of that, but it was inspirational in thinking about what I wanted to do. Here is Joe Biesterfeld's pond, and viewing the pond here, you can see Joe Waiulo from the Long Island Aquarium and Sanjay Yoshi, who many of you are familiar with for his writing on reef aquarium lighting. So what Joe did, he had this pond and it actually had a waterfall in it. He supplemented it with calcium and alkalinity, and he used a chiller to maintain the temperature. But this was in his what we call Florida room, outdoors, natural sunlight. Another inspiration, visiting Charles Delbeck at the Steinhardt Aquarium, they had an acrylic cylinder, large acrylic cylinder with a very low water level and a living mangrove tree, white sand bottom, and a blue-spotted stingray swimming around in circles there. I saw that and I thought, wow, 3 organisms, that's art. It's beautiful. And chocolate chip starfish, 4 organisms. I don't think that they still have this set up. I think they've moved the mangroves elsewhere, but it was breathtakingly beautiful, to me at least. Another organism that does really well in this type of display is the upside-down jellyfish, Cassiopeia. And I love them, and it's not something that you can throw into a reef aquarium, really, but in a pond, they do very well. This is a photograph of a sort of a refugium area on the big reef display at the Steinhardt Aquarium. And it has overhead lighting, some natural sunlight, and some overhead metal halides. Giant clams, top down, that's the way to view them and really appreciate them. White sandbed bottom, not too much rock work. Sea anemones. This is things that I thought I wanted to do. Here's a habitat in Miami. This is in Bear Cut. One of my favorite places to go at low tide in Miami. You don't have to drive all the way to the Florida Keys. You can see this. Sorry, Levi, we didn't go to this spot. We went to another one next time. And you really have to time it well with a good full moon or a new moon to appreciate it. And notice the mangroves and just a vast expanse of sand. And I like this look aesthetically. So, there's this place in front of my house, at the entrance to our house, that when we bought the house just was filled with sand, and it just runs up against a window. And looking at the space, I said to my wife, you know, someday I'd like to put a pond there. I think it would look really attractive. We have a modern style home. It's called Miami Modern, ranch style. And it's common to, if you look in architectural magazines on these old modern homes from the 50s and 60s, to see incorporation of a water feature like a pond. Well, I decided to dig the pond out myself. So me and a shovel and a wheelbarrow, and being busy as I am, it took a while, many, many months. I think it was nearly a year for me to finish where I could actually set it up. And so we had this big hole in the front of the house, and my wife would tell guests if she ever disappeared, look for her there. So finally, after a lot of planning and a lot of digging, this 11-foot long, 4-foot wide, 18-inch deep hole got a liner in March of 2017, and then we filled it. And it's about 500 gallons. Filtration is not too complicated. It only takes up a room. Yeah, the side of our house was adequate for, no. I was not going to do anything quite sophisticated like this. But actually there was a pond setup that I've seen in Miami Beach, and although it wasn't quite this sophisticated, almost, it had a lot of plumbing and a lot of filters. It's not really necessary to do that, but you can if you want. My filtration system was a little bit more austere. It was an old 20-gallon fish tank that I still had, and that became the sump. Let's see, I'll walk over here. Pond is over here, sump is over here. Water overflows from the pond here. Water returns back to the pond here in a way that I'll show you. And water goes to a chiller on the side of the house and then comes back here. Then there's a key element here, which is this drain, this overflow drain that goes to a little grid there and gets buried so that you don't see it. There's the whole setup running. A little bit Rube Goldberg, but it works. There's one pump. There's a valve on the return line to pressurize the flow a little bit to the chiller. The chiller water returns, as I explained. You can see that pipe coming over the edge of the wall there. And then the rest of the water flows back to the pond. As you can see, that's water going to the pond. This is water coming from the pond. So it just recirculates like that. And then in final form, where you don't see the plumbing so much, I filled it with shell. Those of you who use Two Little Fishies product Reborn will appreciate that I get that shell from Reborn. I have staff, employees who pick the shells out of Reborn because the very nitpicky hobbyists who want their pure coral Reborn demand that we do that. So I get the shell, you know, at cost. And I use it as a decorative thing in my front yard here. It goes in the backyard. It's wonderful, it's beautiful as landscaping media. Water top off, I have a reverse osmosis filter located outside that goes to a top off reservoir. I've got a Kamur, I think that's how you pronounce it, Kamur or Komor, dosing, peristaltic dosing pump. So it's humid in Miami, so the evaporation rate from the pond is relatively low, but it does evaporate. By adding water drip, drip, drip all the time, I maintain a water level at that overflow drain in the overflow. And it also means that I'm continuously diluting the pond. So if you had a graph and you were looking at salinity, it's always going down. always going down. And I have to make up for that, which I do. But there's a reason why I do this I'll come back to in a little bit. Mid-morning sunlight in the summer months, June, July, August, looks like this. It lights up most of the pond. This would be from about 8:30 in the morning until maybe 1 o'clock in the afternoon, where I get a pretty decent amount of sun. Then it migrates out, and the rest of the day it's indirect sunlight. This time of year, through the winter, I never have the direct sunlight. It's always indirect the whole day long. And that was an older mangrove tree I was trying out for size, and I ultimately decided that it was too small for the scale aesthetically, and I think I made a mistake in that. I put a bigger tree, which has gotten now too large. Looking at it now, I think, yeah, what was the matter with me? I like that size. So here you can see the water overflowing. This was just a day that I was running it, circulating it. And I'll tell you now a mistake that I made. Can anybody guess what mistake that was? No. Well, mangroves shed leaves, and they do that every single day. So that is a 2-inch drain, which I thought was big enough. Well, the leaves tend to stick to the drain, and once you have one, another one comes along, and then another one, and they pile up, and so it blocks the drain, and then the water level in the pond goes up, which makes the water level in the sump go down, which defeats my drip, drip, drip idea. So that's a mistake, and I need to fix it. This was ultimately the tree that I put in there, and as you'll see later, it has grown a lot. This photo, which is back from 2017, also demonstrates that I had seagrass at that time. I collected, just like a mangrove makes propagules, seagrass make propagules, and I collected the seagrass propagules, basically threw them in the pond, they planted themselves, and they grew very, very well. This was in 2017, right before Hurricane Irma, which was September 10th, 2017, and that's what I came back to. I actually stayed in Boynton Beach during the storm. My mother was under hospice care at that time, and we needed to stay close by. And so I had left my home, and those of you may know I gave a lecture on being prepared for hurricanes after Hurricane Irma, where I made a number of mistakes that ended up killing a lot of my fish population and some of my corals. The pond turned out to be a lifesaver because I was able to put corals from my aquarium indoors into this pond and get it circulating with the chiller. I didn't have power indoors, get it circulating with a generator, and this was a larger volume of water. I was able to change the water with water from the canal, where we live on a canal, and I was able to rescue some fish, some corals, including my large colony of Duncanopsamia, and these were 2 fish. Those 2 clownfish survived. So later, more recently, this is a picture from a couple of years ago, by now, about 2 years ago. You can see the pond is much more grown in, the tree is more grown in. I still have the Duncan in there, it's just too big to put back in the reef aquarium indoors. So, rain, it's the question that people ask me about all the time. How do I deal with that? As I mentioned, I didn't want to have a lot of corals. I was not creating a reef aquarium like the Edge of the Reef at Waikiki. I just wanted mangrove, sandbed, giant clams, seagrass, diadema urchins, some fishes, So I didn't need strong water circulation like you have in a reef aquarium. The water flow is relatively calm. So when it rains, the rain floats on top. You don't get any mixing. And that surface layer of water goes over the overflow, and in the overflow sump, there's another overflow. So it's like water off a duck's back. That fresh water basically just runs out the tank. To a point. So if it rains and rains and rains and rains and rains, and we get a foot of rain in a day, it will drop the salinity down, but not as much as it would if the water was really circulating fast. So I do need to maintain salinity. After all, I'm diluting the tank even if it doesn't rain. And so we manufacture synthetic seawater mix. I got plenty of salt. I just mix up a brine and I add the brine slowly to the tank. So if you have an outdoor pond, this is something that you would have to do unless you have a cover over the pond to prevent the rain from coming in. Certain configurations of outdoor ponds could have an issue even with runoff from adjacent soil. I don't have that issue. There's brick all the way around. If you're located next to a house like mine, you might have some rain come off the roof and you could pick up metals that way. I do have that happening, but I have not seen it turn into an issue so far. This is a diagram illustrating what I explained, that the rainwater floats and just basically flows over the overflow and out the sump to ground. Making brine, can be done manually like this. Just take a 5-gallon bucket, scoop it out of the pond so it's salt water already, and adding some scoops of synthetic seawater mix, spinning it. You can use a pump or use your hand and just spinning around. After a few minutes, it's dissolved, and you just slowly mix that into the pond. If you want to be a little bit more practical, then you can mix this brine up in a separate vat and have a dosing pump and dose it as needed. You could even use a salinity monitor to try to control it. There's a lot of ways that you could keep up with the salinity maintenance. Calcium and alkalinity maintenance, I mainly do that with sea balance. I do occasionally add kalkwasser. I have not added a kalkwasser stir, but maybe someday I will add that to it. Sea balance has been enough so far. The demand for calcium and alkalinity is relatively low. It's basically the giant clams and a little bit of coral that's in there. Temperature maintenance, for a little more, I would say probably 2 years, I ran it without a chiller, so I let the pond get as warm as it would get, and that temperature was typically in the upper 80s, 87, 88, 89 degrees, and that was okay for the animals that I had in there. But there was a summer, I think it was in 2019, where the temperature went up over 90, and I thought, that's really pushing it, and then one of my clams bleached, and I thought, I'm not, I don't think I want to risk this. It looked like it was going to be okay, but a couple of weeks at that temperature, the clam could suffer. And so I bit the bullet and got a chiller, and I've been happy to be able to maintain the temperature. In the real hottest part of the summer, the temperature goes up to probably 82 in the pond, and that's fine. I try to maintain it the rest of the year in the mid to upper 70s. And the chiller, it's what is it? I think it's a 1/4 horsepower by Tico. It runs a fair amount, but it is able to handle the 500 gallons, no problem. In winter, of course, even though we're in Miami, South Florida is never supposed to get cold, it does get chilly. If the temperature is going to fall with a cold front, if it's going to go down to the 60s, I don't worry about it. The pond is in the ground, it's relatively well insulated. So if a cold front is down to 65, 63 degrees, 62 degrees, the pond might go down to 72. You know, it's not a big deal. If the cold front is going to get into the 50s, then I need to intervene. And what I do is I use exercise mats, or like the flooring mats that we have here at the trade show. They float. They're made of like a neoprene. And I just cover the surface of the pond, and that will maintain the temperature. If the temperature is down to 50 degrees or 48 or 45, then I need to add heaters. And what I have found is that all I need is two 200-watt heaters, 400 watts total, and I'm good. So it's not that hard of a thing to deal with. And basically, when it's the really cold part of winter, I just leave those heaters plugged in. Most of the time, they're not plugged in, and if I hear a real major front is coming, I'll plug them in. And I'll put, in addition to the heaters, I'll put the mats on top of the water as needed. Yeah, it's a TK2000. That's the chiller. Typical temperature there, 77.2. And you look at this picture, this is my first chiller on the pond. That's not a good thing, that right there. When I took the photo, I didn't even notice that. There came a point where the chiller failed, and that was corrosion because I live in Miami Beach and we have salt air. And this chiller is located outside, even though it's not getting rained on, it's underneath an eave. There is salt air, and yeah, they have a 2-year life in my environment, which is a little bit expensive, but I don't see an alternative. If there was a chiller that could handle the salt air better, that might help. But it's the aluminum fins, they corrode with that much salt air. So I had to buy another one. Anyway, they're the exercise mats that I use. And I'll basically deploy them at night. And when I'm going to work in the morning, even if it's still cold out, I'll take them off, and the heaters can make up the difference. Yeah, that's what it looks like fully covered. The mangrove prevents me from 100% covering it. So, tale of two stony corals. Here, this is just referring to a few types of corals that had outgrown my indoor reef display, and I experimented with them in the pond. On the upper right there, you can see the echinopora that's affectionately known as Sprung stunner. And stunner is a play on words. It's stunningly beautiful. They also sting corals. So, and they grow so quickly that they shade and overtop corals. So there came a point where this coral just got too big. And I thought, well, what the heck, let's take it out of there and see if it survives in the pond. Well, this coral was like that big, but also about that tall. And when I put it in the pond, it even was maybe a little bit too tall to sit there. I had to adjust it a bit, and something I didn't really think about was that if a coral is all the way almost to the surface, then my whole idea of freshwater floating could be a problem. And it was a problem. Echinopora doesn't like fresh water. So we had a good rain, and it killed the top of the echinopora. And if you've ever killed echinopora, it forms brown jelly. It doesn't just recede and die. So after the rain, I saw this big echinopora with brown jelly all over the surface, and I thought, I'm going to need to get that out of there right away. So I had to sacrifice that coral, took it out, broke off little chips, which I then was able to replant. So the coral is not dead, and this coral is grown by ORA. I gave them the original frag. They have vats full of it. It's interesting to think conceptually that you can have a coral that big and you can kill it, but it's not really dead because it's in aquariums all over the world, the same coral. So that was an experience with Echinopora. Another coral that I took out of the main display because it got too big was the Seriatopora. What is that species? I think it's Gutatus, if I'm not mistaken. It's also one that ORA grows. And I was surprised. It did extremely well in the pond for more than a year, even growing very quickly despite my low calcium and alkalinity additions. So that Seriatopora is really quite hardy. More recently, I lost the colony because I developed a very severe filamentous algae bloom. I may be an expert, but these things do happen. And Seriatopora does not like filamentous algae. The Montipora, which you see in the foreground here, is another one that came out of my display indoor. That's the Christmas, what do they call it? Christmas tree one. It's green with the orange polyps. In natural sunlight, it doesn't look quite like that. It's still thriving. Whatever you throw at it, that coral just grows and does very well. I have several Turbinaria, also fragments that came out of my indoor reef display. So, and they grow beautifully well in the pond, no troubles, not even with filamentous algae. And of course, the Duncan. The Duncan more recently had trouble with a butterfly fish. I, like every aquarist, got Aptasia into my pond, and a 11-foot long tank with Aptasia can get unmanageable in a short period of time. So I put a Juliatensis butterfly fish in there, which is normally pretty safe with corals. Well, it took a liking to the Duncan and made the Duncan close up. So you can see, I think, the most recent videos of the pond. The Duncan is all closed up. But I have recently pulled that butterfly fish out of there, and it's all opened up again and is much happier. In this picture, you can see a pinkish orange carpet anemone that I put in the aquarium, and it thrived for a number of months and made me so happy. Every time I would walk out the front door, I would look and think, you know, the clams are just beautiful, but wow, look at that anemone. And I would stare at it. And that's not a good thing to do. If anybody's been in the hobby long enough, if there's one clam or one coral that just makes you feel so good, staring at it is going to kill it. Don't do that. So I was away on a trip, and I'm not sure what happened, but when I came back, the anemone was upside down on top of a sponge that I had put in the tank. It's what people call Colaspongia. The real name is Lebdenfildia. It's a blue encrusting sponge that does really well in the pond, and it encrusts and kills corals. Apparently it kills anemones too. You do not want to put Lebdenfildia next to a carpet anemone or let them touch. And you don't want to stare at them. So unfortunately, I lost that anemone. The giant clams do really, really well. This is a Durasa clam that I got from ORA. I was able, on a visit, to cherry pick. It was only that big when I got it, and I saw the potential. It had a lot of green. It's now this big and super beautiful. Feather dusters do extremely well in the pond. This was one that I got at a reef stock several years back in Denver. It was a colony of Montipora, and it had these 4 big feather dusters on it. Zoanthids do really well in the ponds. Various starfish, sea cucumbers. Banggai cardinal fish multiply. reproduce in the pond. The diadema urchins, it really creates the natural scene for them like they live in Indonesia. Yeah. I needed to add diadema urchins, on the one hand for their aesthetic beauty, on the other hand, in the early phase of the pond, I had some filamentous algae that kind of got out of hand, and the diademas helped to control it. More recently, it plowed through, and even the filamentous algae was too strong even for them to deal with. But I do now have it turning the corner and coming under control. On a smaller exhibit, it's easier to do that than on a bigger one. I add various types of red seaweed on occasion for the diadema urchins to feed, because most of the time I don't have any algae blooming in the tank. They eat it all up. So this is something I do occasionally, and I'll get the ragged sea hare. It comes in on the red seaweed either as eggs or as very, very tiny, newly settled sea hares. And what surprised me is that you can go from nothing to a sea hare this big in a matter of weeks. They grow super fast. I also have the fighting conch in the system to help with the sand bed. I get cyanobacteria on the sand bed just like everybody else. I recently got a number of the Indo-Pacific, what are they called, Levi? Tiger sand conch. I love them. I got them from Levi. There's the Florida fighting conchs are about this big, and I have 2 of them in that pond. But I added these little ones, and they are all over the place in there. I also got a spider conch, right, from you, and that, you know, they grow to, spider conch grows to about this big. This one is this size, and it's amazing to see it move around in there. Conchs are great for maintaining a sand bed. Highly recommend them, even in a reef aquarium. Now, you see this picture and you see a starfish there, and I've got the caption sea biscuit, and you think, what am I talking about? Well, there is right there a sea biscuit. And a sea biscuit is a very highly modified type of a sea urchin, very short spines, and they burrow through the sand bed, feeding on diatoms, detritus, stuff in the sand. I unfortunately lost my sea biscuit recently. I had issues on occasion with the diadema urchins. They would graze. Have you've seen that, Sarah? It's a strange thing. Diadema are known to be herbivores, but they will, on occasion, eat other urchins. And so, and they did this occasionally damaging the sea biscuit, and it survived. I separated them, but eventually it was lethal. After I'd had it about 3 years in the pond, it had plenty to eat. It, you know, was doing very well. So if you want to have thriving sea biscuits, you can't keep them with diadema. That's what they look like if you unbury them. I have Holothuria sea cucumbers, and they reproduce in the system. So I forget how many I added, but I have a lot more of them now than I did when I started. I find you find babies about this size. I saw a paper recently, maybe you know about this, Sarah, how they reproduce. I don't think that it actually involves, planktonic larvae. I think there's some brooding, and then it's like a live birth of cucumbers about that size. Edible shrimp. I used a net and collected little grass shrimp in seagrass in South Florida. And among the little bitty grass shrimp, there's always a few of the edible shrimp, this size. If you put edible shrimp this size into the pond, a few months later, they are edible size. It's unbelievable how fast they grow. So I'm not surprised what a good business it is to set up a shrimp farm. It doesn't take much to grow them to market size. Ornamental macroalgae grow really well in the natural sunlight. Before I put the diadema in, I put Caulerpa paspaloides, which is one of the most beautiful Caulerpa species. It's native here in Florida. It's giant. It's really too big for the average aquarium, but it's great in a pond like this. Those palm tree-like things are that tall and like that big around. So you would need a really big aquarium or a pond to really feature it. The lettuce slug thrives in the pond, although their populations will boom and bust. I'll get them reproducing and then they all disappear. The same as you can see in nature. Tunicates do reasonably well. I have grown some of the colonial tunicates as well as the local black solitary tunicate. So, you know, whatever phytoplankton is growing in the natural sunlight appears to be enough. I imagine if I were to feed live phytoplankton and live zooplankton, I might encourage some of these filter feeders to grow a little bit more, but they seem to get by fine enough just as is. Sponges do quite well in the pond. I need to add pictures. Sorry, I don't have pictures to show you that, but I do have a number of sponge species. I mentioned the seagrass earlier, but the diadema graze it down. So if you want seagrass, no diadema. Head and lateral line erosion repair. That was something I was able to demonstrate in the pond. I had this purple tang in a 60-gallon reef display at Two Little Fishies, and that system was really too small for it. There were other aggressive feeders in there, so the fish was not eating as well as it should, and the fins eroded and the lateral line eroded a bit. After about 6 months in the pond, the fins grew back and the lateral line repaired. There are a couple of small scars on the side, but otherwise the fish looks totally normal and is still in there. Another problem you can have in outdoor ponds, whether saltwater or freshwater, is birds, especially here in Florida. I had a damselfish that had been in a number of different tanks and ultimately ended up in the pond. And it was a mid-water swimming damselfish, which was not good for its survivability in the pond because a night heron spotted it. And I actually saw the night heron watching the fish, and I thought, I don't think he can catch it. Well, yeah, he got it. Raccoons are a possibility. I have never had problem with it, but I had a friend who had an outdoor reef aquarium, and the raccoons would get in it at night and catch fish. Iguanas. They don't necessarily cause a problem, but I have had iguanas get into the pond. I've had iguanas that were sunning themselves on the walkway next to the pond, and when I walk to go to my front door, they jump into the pond because that's what iguanas do. They jump into water to escape. And now I know not to do that because when an iguana, especially a big one, jumps in your pond, it can do a lot of damage. Airborne dust is a concern for any outdoor aquarium. Has it been a problem for me? Not yet, but it could be. What are some other problems? I mentioned the leaf issue. There it is illustrated. Not a good thing. So how am I going to solve that? Well, ultimately I'm going to rip out the pond. I'm going to get rid of the plywood and liner, and I have two options. I could do it in concrete with forms, or I could do it with fiberglass, to have a custom-made fiberglass trough. And I think fiberglass is the way I'm going to do it, and then basically have a wall, an overflow wall that goes directly into the sump in fiberglass. I'm thinking long-term because mangrove roots can push, and my hunch is that in a concrete tank, the mangrove, if I'm not careful, it could possibly crack the concrete. Whereas in fiberglass, it's flexible, it should be safe. Maintenance of the mangrove, I do every couple of months have to do this kind of a haircut And despite doing that, I've allowed the tree to get too big. So that was one cut. This was another one a few months later. It's quite a lot of mass that comes off of it. And I try to do it in a way where the tree doesn't look ugly. More recent shot here, you can see the hair algae creeping in there, and the Duncan was closed at this point. I still had the butterfly fish in there. Yeah, hair algae can get hairy on a big scale. Natural sunlight, a little extra nutrients, low alkalinity level. It doesn't take much. I put in some sailfin mollies because I thought they may be able to control the hair algae. Didn't work, unfortunately. So there you can see a Cassiopeia jellyfish, but also, you know, how hair algae can be a problem. Future plans. I mentioned that I want to redo the pond to take care of that overflow problem. I want to do stonework around the pond, something like this, using our local limestone in South Florida, which has that nice effect. I think I want to combine the limestone and brick, which I already have there. I've talked to some stonemasons, and I think most people want to just rip out the brick and do only limestone. We'll see which way I go. If you're familiar with Marco rocks, we have this wonderful oolitic limestone in South Florida. Wonderful building material. I do want to add carbon filtration, easy enough to do with a reactor. I think it would be wise to add an algal filter that would help prevent problems like occasional blooms with hair algae. I don't really need to add artificial lights, but I think it would be kind of cool to add some LEDs for nighttime viewing. Bigger pond, I don't really have the space for it, so that's not going to happen in my tank, or my system, but maybe someday somewhere else. We'll see. Before I finish, I want to mention another system that was inspirational for me. If you ever go to La Jolla, California, you have to visit the Scripps Aquarium. And outdoors, behind the aquarium, they have this display, which duplicates a California tide pool. And it has a wave surge device that you can see off on the right side. And the wave just billows into this thing and creates eddies that spin around. See that right there? It's the most fascinating thing to watch. I would love to have that sort of a setup on my pond. Maybe I can do that. Worldwide Corals Lagoon is an inspiration that was inspired by my pond and my use of mangroves. And they did something that I did not want to do, which was to create a highly dense, diverse reef system in the lagoon. But I have to say, you know, I'm in awe. If you haven't been there, make your trip to Orlando, check this out. It is magnificent. So that is my talk. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. You have the microphone that you could go around and have people ask in a way that everybody can hear. Go ahead. Let's get a microphone there.
So since you have natural temperatures and natural photo period on some of your larger colonies, are you seeing reproductive spawning with your coral?
I have not seen any spawning, but it is the natural light, and we do have temperature variance. It's a good question. I haven't looked, to be honest with you. So I need to connect with Carrie and get a little first-hand experience on how to spot it. Yeah. Thanks. More questions? Yeah.
Hey, do you think with like a certain type of artificial like plastic to filter out some of the natural sunlight, you could maybe do away with the hair algae? Are there materials that would let certain wavelengths through but not others?
Yeah, the hair algae it's not really caused by the sunlight. but the sunlight does, as any artificial light, or any light, artificial or natural, would promote the growth. The hair algae is there because I have enough nutrients for it, and I'm not keeping up with the calcium and alkalinity maintenance as much as I should. Hair algae likes a low alkalinity and availability of phosphate. Those are the main issues. So if I were to have continuous filtration, either with an algal filter or with GFO to get the phosphate under control, and have my alkalinity maintenance boost the alkalinity up higher, I don't think I would ever have a hair algae issue.
Having this outdoor pond, in your opinion, there's no negative sun rays, so to speak, that would cause issues in the aquarium. You can have negatives. Basically full-on sunlight, full-on ray on your tank for certain areas is fine.
Full sunlight is fine, but remember, again, it's not a reef tank. Full sunlight could be too much for certain corals, but it's fine for the mangrove, it's fine for the seagrass, it's fine for other algae I have in there, it's fine for the sponges. So no need to filter it.
Thank you.
You got it. Yeah. Another question.
Do you know what par level is hitting the Duncan coral in June?
The question was about par level? Oh, the Duncan.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's getting blasted in July and August, I can tell you that. No problem. Yeah. So, and clams love full sunlight too. They look their best in June, July, August. This time of year, since they're not getting the direct sunlight, they become paler, but healthy, just not as vibrantly colored. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. Feel free to stop by Two Little Fishies. I have not eaten them, but I could. I mean, I have gotten them up to about that size. Yeah.